invitados, en este caso Ty West, premio honorífico Time Machine Award esta noche, y también presentación de su última película, Pearl, que es de esa pretendida y que será verdad trilogía que empezó con X y que hoy presentamos en el festival. Ty es uno de esos directores que nace en un momento de expansión del cine fantástico y de terror a principios de los 2000 hacia territorios más independientes y con una apertura de género mucho mayor que surge en festivales incluso no especializados, como puede ser Sundance, y ha estado en el festival con películas, él no, pero hemos tenido el festival con The Roost, que él sí que estuvo presente, con películas como Innkeepers, House of Devil, que es una de las películas quizá con mejor recuerdo entre los aficionados de este festival, y también la excelente película que sirvió de clausura aquí en Sitges, The Sacrament. Bueno, lo que vamos a hacer es unas preguntas introductorias por mi parte para que os vayáis pensando las vuestras y después abriremos un turno de preguntas. Y el diálogo será en inglés, es decir, no habrá traducción para aligerarlo un poquito, y en el caso que hubiese algún tema, alguna aclaración, tenemos aquí una experta perfecta para hacer la traducción. ¿De acuerdo? Pues empezamos ya, ¿no? Hello, Ty.
Hello.
I said to the audience that your first film is in the beginning of the 2000s. It's a period of changes in the horror industry. A lot of directors like you try to present to the audience in the festival different kind of horror from in these roots and different perspective than the mainstream or another kind of horror in the time. What is your idea about these beginnings in the 2000s?
Personally, I mean, I was not around any of the movie business. So I was sort of in the middle of nowhere just trying to make a movie. So I didn't think too much about what people would think about it or what it would be like in a landscape of movies. I was just very excited and somewhat desperate to get a movie made. So I just mostly focused on that. I think looking back on it, certainly there was the tail end of all the remakes, I think, was around then, or maybe it was about to be a lot of remakes. And horror got very, very popular after that from a commercial standpoint. And it wasn't really in the early 2000s and late 90s. It was not, Scream was in the 90s and was very popular, and they sort of made every ripoff known to man with Scream, and then it kind of ran out of steam. So I don't know, I felt very kind of outside of it all, just making stuff. And I felt, to get to come to a place like this or something like that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that was going on that I was not aware of. And there was kind of its own little independent, propped up by festival world of movies, and I sort of existed in that world at the time, and so that I was very grateful that such a thing existed.
In relation with that, you make the Innkeepers in the second decade of this century, and in that time also there's a lot of approach about haunted house movies, no? Very successful, like Insidious or Insidious 2, and in the middle is Innkeepers, but in a different kind of idea of the haunted house movie, but also with a very teenager profile also in some moments of the film. What is the idea in the Innkeepers? Why in that moment in your career?
Yeah, at the time I wasn't thinking about it, but there weren't a lot of ghost movies then. But we had made The House of the Devil in Connecticut in the United States, and we stayed at a hotel called the Yankee Peddler because it was a cheap place to stay while we were making the movie. And everybody said the place was haunted, and everybody that worked there believed it was haunted. And there was two people that worked at the front desk that were trying to prove that it was haunted. And so this was like a real thing that was happening while I was making House of the Devil. And so the idea for the movie just came from having lived it a year prior. So I wrote it because I had had that experience, and I knew that the place existed, and if we could just go back to the actual place, it was pretty much ready to shoot. It would be very inexpensive because a lot of times you write a movie and then you have to either build something to match it, or you have to find something to match it, or rewrite to match real life. I wrote a place when we walked in, it was like, oh, everything's exactly as the script was because I had spent time there. And then when we finished that movie, we premiered the same time as Insidious did because James and I were both at, I think, South by Southwest. And then it just became this whole ghost movies everywhere after that. But that's, I don't know if that's just coincidence or what. I didn't think much about it. I just had this weird experience living in a haunted hotel and thought this would make a fun movie.
Some critics, some people from the fantastic cinema said that you're a cool director, but that's in some terms. But your reference are cool films of the 70s, on the 80s, and especially House of the Devil. I think all the satanic panic of the 70s. What for you is the difference that type of cult of about 70s, 80s, and now, no? Because it's a very different ways to arrive to the cult of, in the movies today. And House of the Devil is a very recent film, and but a lot of people say that in least House of the Devil is a cool movie now. What do you think about this difference about the idea of the cult in the genre today and in the past? No?
I don't know. I'm not that interested in modern movies, making them, I mean, because I'm not that interested in like technology in movies. And I'm not that interested in making something that seems to be reflecting real life. And I think a lot of modern movies tend to be, you know, people on phones and people on computers, and that makes sense because that's what people are living. But that to me is just so boring to watch. And so I'm always trying to find, you know, a story that's interesting, that visually speaking can feel unique and can feel like if you see, like if someone sees Pearl today, you could pick out a shot from the movie or at any point in the movie and go like, oh, I know what movie that is and I know who made it. Because it doesn't look like other stuff. It's like, you know, if you put a frame up from Pearl, it's chances are you won't be like, well, it might be, you're like, that's Pearl. And if that's the case, then that means that my voice or my personality or whatever it have, your vision, whatever it may be, is coming across consistently, and you can feel a sense of like authorship from me. And that's appealing to me because I think those are the movies that I like. And so as far as cult movies and things like that, I think movies that stand the test of time and have like fans are generally kind of interesting, more idiosyncratic movies than the average commercial fare. And so that's just always been my taste. And I don't set out to do that. It just seems to happen that way.
Okay. I think there will be there will be a lot of questions about your horror, strictly horror movies in the audience. But I want to ask about your relation with other genres. For example, a little bit in Triggerman with a kind of a thriller. Triggerman was won here an award in Sitges, and also with a Western because it's the John Travolta thing was very strange in your career. Also in the panorama of the American cinema now. And in the case of the series, because it's very, I am very interested about the relation with science fiction in Tales from the Loop. I think one of the best episodes are directed by you. What is your relation with different genres, not only the horror?
I have less of a. I mean, I love horror movies, and I always have. I think because I've made some of them. It may seem as if that is 24/7 what I'm thinking about, and it's not. I had made however many, 6, 7 movies in a row, and they were all horror movies, or at least horror-ish movies. And I wanted to take a break, and so I took a break, and I made In the Valley of Violence, the Western. And then I got an opportunity to direct a television show, which turned into an opportunity to direct many television shows. And my favorite of the ones I've done was Tales from the Loop, so I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, whether it be Western or sci-fi, or I've done like a romantic comedy dance musical show. I mean, I'm very happy to just work within all. Truthfully, whenever I do a TV series, I'm always looking to try to do something that's very much not horror. Because if I go do a horror show, it's fine, but they're just calling me because I kind of know how to do it, and I know how to do like whatever sort of scary thing they want or a gory thing that they want, and it's like I have a technical proficiency to work well for them in that. But that's not that interesting to me, because that's just me going there to do something very technical. Whereas if I do a show that's like, I've done like a hospital show, you know, like where like the doctors don't play by the rules, like one of those kind of shows. And it was like, I don't know, I'll never really write a movie that's like that. So I got the opportunity to do that. And Tales from the Loop is probably more in my wheelhouse than some of the others. But that was a really great experience with a great script and a great way to sort of, I think that show feels very much like Nathaniel who wrote it, but I think that my episode also feels like you can feel me in it, which I think in a lot of other shows I do is not the case. So that was a real pleasure to do that.
I must say that your Webster was here in the Critics Week also.
Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to get back here for many years.
We love
Yes.
Websters. Ok, vamos, abrimos turno de palabras, si queréis ya empezar a preguntar. Aquí veo una primera pregunta.
Hi. You talk about working on television. Can you talk a bit about them? You directed a couple episodes, I think. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, do you want anything specific I can answer for you?
The season finale, I really enjoyed it. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was Little Marvin, who's the creator of that show, kind of called me, and he was a big House of the Devil fan, and he asked me if I would come do the show, and I said sure, and then got there, and he had a lot of really interesting ideas, and the aesthetic of the show was really interesting, and the finale was a lot. Like it was as challenging of a finale as I've ever had to do, because it was a lot going on in it, but it was a great time, and Little Marvin is really. Him and I got along right away, and so his taste and my taste, I think, lined up. And the cast was really wonderful on that show. So it was certainly hard. I mean, it was technically difficult, and then the subject matter was like super heavy. So it was always like every day was like, okay, this is a lot. But I was happy to be there and very grateful for the opportunity. For TV, for me, like anyone to ask me to come do something is like, my answer's not always yes, but it's mostly always yes, because when you make your own movies, no one offers you a job, because if you write your own movie, you have to write it, then you got to go find the money, and then you have to make it, and then if you're fortunate enough for that to go well, you still go all the way back to zero and have to start with a blank page again. Whereas for a TV show, someone's like, well, we're already making this. Can you be here on Wednesday? And so I'm always happy to do it. And then in instances like them or Tales from the Loop, sometimes I get to go there, and the showrunners are like, we have the same taste as me, and so it was actually, the production designer of that show came to New Zealand and did X and Pearl with me, because we got along very well on that.
Si queréis hacer las preguntas en castellano, las puede traducir, es decir, si estáis más cómodos.
Hello, I'm Sabrina Crivelli from an Italian website, Il Cinocchio, and I wish to explore with you more in detail the genesis and the initial phases of X and Pearl. How did you get in touch with A24 and with Mia Gott, the script writing, and so on? Mm-hmm. So, thanks.
Well, I had been doing a lot of television, and I'd been thinking about wanting to make a movie again, but trying to figure out what I would make it about, because I was having a good time directing television, and I didn't have a strong desire to go back to doing movies. But I also felt like horror movies had felt a little soft lately, and maybe it was time to do something like a slasher type movie. I also was thinking about why I liked movies at all, and what I like about movies the most is the sort of craft of cinema. So I was trying to think of a movie that would be like maybe a slasher movie that would really celebrate the craft of filmmaking and whatnot, and how to present that to a modern audience who has less reverence for, I think, cinema than people once did, because we're just so inundated with moving images that I don't think it's as like grandiose of a thing. Like, I don't think people think about how weird and interesting it is that like a whole bunch of people go out and make a movie, and then that's what you see. I think people take it for granted today more than they used to. Anyway, so that's kind of where the idea for X came from, was like, okay, a movie about people making movie, and what would be a slasher movie, and then skipping to the point, it turned into X. And I wrote that just without telling anybody. And I'd known A24 for 10 years or so, and we'd always talked about making a movie, but it just never really timed out to make sense. And so I sent X to them, and I said, maybe we could do this. I'd understand if it's too much for you, but read it and let me know what you think. And they read it right away, and they were like, we have to think about it. And I was like, I understand. And then they called me back like 2 days later, and they were like, actually, we think we really have to do it. And so that was it. They were the only people I sent it to, and we were off to the races to make that movie. And we were geared up and ready to make it in, I want to say it was like May of 2020, and this was probably like January, and I was doing Them at the time. I was doing the finale of Them, and I was like, when I finish this finale, I'm going to go off and we're going to make this movie in Texas. then the whole world stopped. And when the whole world stopped, we knew we weren't going to make it in the summer, but it needed to take place in the summer. And so we were going to have to push the movie a whole year. And nobody wanted to do that. A24 didn't want to do that. And realistically, if we pushed it a year, it would have probably fallen apart because who's around in a year, especially with everything that was going on. So our last-ditch effort was to look at the Southern Hemisphere because it would be summer down there where it was winter in the States. And we looked at New Zealand because the Weta Workshop, which is a very famous world-class prosthetics makeup place, was there. And it was the only safe place in the world at the time to make a movie. And we were fortunate enough to be able to get in and get visas to do that. So when that happened, we sort of got ready to go down to New Zealand. And I thought I had made a movie years prior called The Sacrament. And in that movie, we built this whole compound, and we populated it with extras, and we shot there nearly every day. And it was really weird because it was houses and the people walking around with laundry all the time, and so it really felt like a real place. And then when we finished that movie, we just tore it down and went home. And that's a really strange feeling, and it's a somewhat wasteful feeling in a way, because it's so strange to have had that experience, and then now it's just back to being someone's backyard. And I thought, well, it'd be a shame to put all this effort into going to New Zealand and spending all this time and effort and money creating this world, this little like corner of Texas in the middle of New Zealand, to just do one movie and go home when no one else in the world can make a movie. So is there a way to make two movies? But I didn't want to make a sequel because more people going to a farm and just dying didn't seem particularly interesting. So the only other option was to kind of go backwards and do a prequel. And I had cast Mia Goth just in the normal way. She just, with the script went out for X, she liked it, we met, and I had pitched her the idea of playing both characters, and she really liked that idea. And I knew as soon as I met her, I was like, we're good, that's her. So I asked her if she would stick around for a couple extra months if we made another movie. She said she would, and so then it became like, how do I convince A24 to make two movies in a row when we haven't even made one movie together? And I had 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine to get into New Zealand. And that's a long time to sit in a room, so I felt like if there was ever a time to write a script, it was then. And so I asked Mia if she wanted to collaborate from the conception on this one because she was Pearl, so it felt like there was no movie without her. And I was in New Zealand, she was in New York, and we would FaceTime and then crank this script out, and we did that. And A24 liked it and said, okay, we have to think about it. And this is the second time they told me they had to think about something. But the last time they said yes, so I thought, okay, maybe they're going to say yes. And I kind of presented them a whole plan of like, here's how we do it, and here's how it's inexpensive, and here's how we need to decide now, so that way X can be informed by it. And so, complete credit to them, having never worked with me before, they completely just bet on me and Mia, and they greenlit the second movie before we made the first one. And then we made them back to back, knowing we were going to do that. So if you see Pearl and then you go back and watch X, there's all sorts of things in it that relate to Pearl and vice versa. And so I'm just very fortunate. It was a very unique, a series of unique timings that seemed to happen that came together to make these two movies. And I thought I was going to go to New Zealand for 3 months, and I was there for 13. And so we made two movies in a row.
Yo te quería preguntar por tus referencias sobre el cine de terror, en concreto, ¿cuáles han sido tus referencias de cine de terror de los 70 a la hora de hacer cine? Gracias.
I wanted to ask you about your references in horror movies, specifically from the 70s.
Well, I don't have a lot of specific ones. I have the fact that like I've seen an enormous amount of particularly 70s horror movies and certainly a great decade for horror films. And so they're always just kind of in my subconscious, I think, when I make anything. In the case of X, we were very much trying to make it look as convincingly 70s as possible, but most of the stuff we would watch as far as aesthetic references weren't horror movies. Certainly Texas Chainsaw Massacre like looms large over that movie because it's a movie about people in Texas who, and it's a slasher movie and they're in a van, but I always felt like because that was going to be looming over the movie, rather than try to avoid it, I'm just going to lean into it and let you think for the first 20 minutes of the movie. You're certain you know what the movie's going to be. It's going to be just like Texas Chainsaw. And then at some point, the movie goes a completely different direction and it's not about it. And I always felt like because so many people know that movie, most likely people will think so much about that movie that they'll miss a lot of things that are like clues that are happening in the movie that I'm making, and they will actually, when they find themselves in the movie that I'm making, will have a fresh experience that maybe they wouldn't have had otherwise. So it was kind of a good distraction thing to have people thinking about Texas Chainsaw and then be like, but it's not at all that movie once it gets going.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Laura from Beside, from Italy. And speaking about this kind of 70 genres, like 80 also genres, like horror and porn, that you mixed up so well. And these two genres are the two genres that were so mistreated in cinema, you know? Like horror and porn are the Z movies, not the B movies, but the Z movies. And you instead created like crafty and arty and so colorful and so exposed, you know, genres, and mixing them up. And as well as we in Italian cinema had this kind of wave of Italian horror that transformed into erotic and then porn in the late 80s. So I wanted you to elaborate a bit about this mix.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that was a big part of the movies, was this sort of this celebration of the trilogy has kind of become this sort of like love letter to cinema and styles of filmmaking. And you know, for instance, X, because it takes place in the 70s, a big part of the reason for that is I didn't want them to be making a horror movie, but other than horror movies, most other movies that would be made in the 1970s were made like in Hollywood somewhere. But I didn't really know anything about that or have any interest in making a movie about people making a movie in Hollywood. So the only other genre that was made like independently, that was that could be without stars, that you could make just sort of by yourself and find your own way to distribute it directly to people, most commonly was porn. And that was the era that was starting to boom, because suddenly now there was a whole way for people to be in the movie industry in a new, unexpected way. And I felt like it was a good, historically, slasher movies specifically have always been like lowest common denominator, like sex and violence kind of genre. And so to try to, they fit very well together as far as in the idea of X, as a way to try to take something that was typically lowbrow and maybe try to do something a little more highbrow with it. And also, porn is one of those things that if you're not familiar with making movies, the end result of porn is sort of meant to be erotic, but the actual making of it is not as silly, just like anything else would be. So it was a good way to let the audience in to see what it was like making movies. As far as how those movies are treated, yeah, I mean, I suppose that they are, there's different variations of how looked down upon they are. Maybe sometimes justifiably so, maybe sometimes not. I mean, that's much more of a question for the people that see the movies rather than the people that make the movies in a way. But I always felt that there was like a symbiotic relationship between those two genres, because they could be made completely outside of the system. And that opened up doors for people that ordinarily did not, that needed to be like let in the doors. Now they did not. They could do it themselves. And that's where the idea for X came from. As far as like Italian cinema, you know, there's certainly from the Bava through Argento and whatnot, there's certainly like this wave of filmmakers who almost like operatically fetishized the genre elements of a genre movie. And as someone who's watched a lot of movies and someone who's a fan of a lot of movies, and particularly horror movies, that obviously had an effect on me when I saw them. And I don't know that I was thinking that directly about them in any way in making these movies. Maybe the scene in X when the RJ gets killed in the headlights is certainly, you know, from somewhere in my subconscious is thinking about that sort of stylistic fetishization of it. But I mean, I think that's just kind of those movies, they just hold their place in the history of genre movies, and rightfully so. And I think they're very unique for that matter. There's no other, that era of Italian horror movies, there's not like they also were doing that in Amsterdam. Like it was just there, you know, and so that just becomes a very interesting thing in the history of all. And if you're a fan of cinema, then, you know, you could look past the subject matter and you could just look at the cinema of it.
I have a question related to the editing process and the whole post-production process of the two films. Being them shot together side by side, I guess the editing team was located in New Zealand, wasn't it? And how did you approach the cutting? Because you were cutting X together while shooting Pale, so how does thing work, especially when you said 3 months turned into 13? So I guess that the post-production process, if not finalized, was worked through in New Zealand. And how is that different to your usual suspects of making a movie in the US? Thank you. Thank you very much.
It wasn't that different. So I got to New Zealand November 1st of 2020, and we sort of prepped. We didn't do that much between then and the holidays because there wasn't much to do other than just setting up the office and getting ready. And then in January we started prep and the actors showed up and we shot X, I want to say in February and March. And then we had the majority of April to prep Pearl, and then we shot Pearl in like May and finished it probably early June. I had a co-editor on X who could cut while I was shooting Pearl, just so we didn't get so far behind. So those 4 weeks or 5 weeks when we were shooting Pearl, his name was David Kashevarov, but Cash was working on X. And then when I finished Pearl, the goal was to like work on X with him in the morning and then leave X with him in the afternoon and go work on Pearl. And that didn't work at all. So like, and the goal was that I would basically be working on Pearl, but I'd be giving him feedback in the morning so he could work in the afternoon, and then I would see it the next day. And it was too kind of schizophrenic to work on the two movies at the same time. So what ended up happening is like him and I just sort of like tag teamed X and cut that from probably June to, I don't know, maybe the beginning of August, and then finished that locked picture. And then I went on to Pearl, which was brutal, to go from like locking picture on a movie to go back to like zero and start over. And so then I started probably in August cutting Pearl, and I probably locked picture end of October. And then we color corrected both of them in New Zealand, and then I came back into the sound mix in the States. So, I mean, it was all just like 7-day weeks since 2020 for me. Like I've just worked all day, every day on these two movies at the same time, and then getting the third one going as well. So it's just been, the ultimate answer has just been nonstop work. But it's good, you know. One day I'll take a break.
Hey man, thanks for coming, thanks for your time. I've actually arrived here by coincidence. A friend handed me a ticket, she wouldn't make it in time. And I'm finding it really interesting. I'm a fellow filmmaker as well. I'm writing a script for a mystery film, and I'm finding that there's a thin line between mystery and horror, like moments of hope and dread. And in fact, some of the films I remember the most were horror films. They evoke strongest emotions, feelings out of you. So I wanted to ask you if you personally have any tips or advice when it comes to finishing up a script, like those moments when you're stuck. There's like very simple elements I can't seem to lock down. If you would have any personal advice.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a tricky thing to give advice on because everybody's different. But I will give you the advice that, as if I'm assuming everyone is the same. I don't think it's ever easy, and I don't think there's ever an instance where you're not stuck on something like that. I think that's what writing is. The parts where it's easy is the lie. Like that's the part that's abnormal. And I think the way to, and if it ever just happens where it's just like piece of cake, then enjoy, because it's never going to happen again. It's like you got lucky on one. But I think generally speaking, it's like you just have to show up every day and just chip away at it. And there's some days where you're going to get one sentence done, but that's at least better than zero. And I think the worst thing you can do is sit back and try to outthink the idea and try to go, well, I don't want to write until I have it sorted. I don't think that works. I think you just have to write every day. And so if I'm writing a script, I have like 3 chunks of about an hour and a half a day. Like I do one in the morning, and then I'll go run some errands or something, and then I'll do one in the afternoon, and then I'll go like exercise or something, and then do another one. And that only ends up being like 3-4 hours a day. It's not that much, but it's like intensive for those times. And some days, like I said, you'll get one sentence done or you'll go backwards. You'll make it worse. But if you show up every day, eventually, 2 months in or something, maybe you'll be like, I got there. But if you sit back and try to think, I don't want to work on it today because I haven't figured it out, in my experience, you just get further and further away from it, and it's something like the best example I have is something like exercise, in that it's like, it's not necessarily that hard to do it, but it's really easy not to. And the more you do it, the easier it gets and the better you get at it. And one day you realize like, oh, this got easier and I didn't even notice it happening. I think this writing is that. I think you have to just stay at it and you get better by doing it. And so, and you could bounce it off friends too if it's something that's like a plot thing you can't figure out. Maybe you have a friend that could help. But ultimately, I think just like forcing yourself to sit down and just, what I would do for Mia, because Mia had never read a script before, and when we worked on Pearl, she was struggling to try to figure out like how to do it. And I just said, like, set a timer on your phone for an hour, and I would give her the first sentence of a scene, and I would be like, just write whatever comes out of your head. I don't care if it doesn't even make sense. Just go for an hour, and then send it to me. And a lot of it would be like nothing. But then there'd be like this one chunk. That'd be great. And I could take that, and I would put it over here, and then I would give it back to her, and she would be like, oh, most of that was nothing, but there's this one chunk that then made it into the scene that ended up making the scene very cool, which gave her an idea for something else later. So it's, you just throw away the stuff that doesn't work, and you keep the stuff that does, but you don't get to that one chunk unless you do the rest of it.
As far as writing your last two movies, I was wondering, you mentioned Bava and Argento, but mostly all of your influences sort of looming over you as you wrote. What do you think had more weight on the page, character or atmosphere, meaning sort of aesthetic?
I don't think that my scripts have much aesthetic on the page. If I really feel like someone needs to understand the style, I might write it a little bit more heavy-handed, but generally speaking, it's not like you read the scripts and it tells you the shots, or you read the script and it tells you that it's supposed to be scary or something like that. So I aim more for, I think about character as far as if you're reading a script of mine, hopefully like you can picture the people in your head and you can hear their voices and you like them or don't like them if that's the point. And you can kind of get a sense of like the world in which where the movie takes place. But because I write and direct and edit, most of my like aesthetic stuff, you know, you could read the Pearl script and picture it as a very austere black and white movie and not this like Technicolor kind of thing, easily. Because that wasn't on the page at all. But that's because I do my own thing and I haven't really had the need to convince people of that. So for me, I'm just trying to convince people of the character and the overall story that, you know, if you're reading along and it's a page turner, then that's good.
Sus últimas películas las ha producido A24, que es la firma que está detrás de muchos de los títulos de eso que llaman el elevated horror. ¿Qué opina de esta etiqueta? Gracias.
Your last movies were shot with A24. What are your thoughts, or what do you think about this label?
They're great. Yeah, I'm in such a fortunate situation with them, and they really bet on me. I'm not sure why, but they did, and we ended up making 2 movies together, and now we're going to make a third, and I'm hoping it's the beginning or of a long relationship with them, because they're very respectable filmmakers, and they're very much on the side of the movies they make. They champion their movies in a really cool way, and yeah, from the collaboration standpoint, it's been effortless.
Hola, Tai. Me gustaría saber dónde te encuentras más cómodo, dentro del cine de terror psicológico, que es el que prefiero yo en este sentido, o en el cine gore. Lo digo referente también a tu película Cabin Fever, Cabin Fever 2, en la cual parece que no estuviste muy de acuerdo con el montaje final, y creo que ibas a firmarla con un seudónimo. Este es realmente tu único film gore, creo. ¿Qué piensas de ello? De si te encuentras más cómodo en un subgénero o en otro.
Where do you feel more comfortable, working with psychological terror or with gory? And he believes there's one project that you didn't agree much on and that you didn't want to sign in the end. So his question is, where do you feel...
Cabin Fever too.
Cabin Fever. Where do you feel more comfortable, with psychological terror or with gory?
I don't feel more comfortable with one or the other. It just depends on, I tend to have like an idea for a movie, and if I like that idea, it sticks around. And if it sticks around, it starts to kind of grow. And then I just do whatever seems to make the most sense for that idea. And sometimes it's very gory, and sometimes it's not gory at all. I think filming-wise, I always dread having to shoot anything gory because it's very technical. And so the experience on set is like you're just trying to get the tube of blood to work a certain way. All the stuff that's fun to watch is I find very unpleasant to make because it's just such a technical challenge that it's just little bits and pieces here and there, and you don't really get the experience of, the collaboration with making a film with people like you do in a scene when there's just actors acting versus when you're just trying to get blood to squirt on a wall in a certain way, and it doesn't, and then you have to clean it up, and you're running out of time. It's very stressful. But the effect of it on screen when it's done is great, and so, you go through the trauma in order to get it done. And yeah, Cabin Fever 2 was one of those ones that sort of got away from me, and it happens, I guess. It seems so long ago now. At the time, it was very traumatic, but it was a series of things that sort of went wrong on that, and there wasn't a way for me to sort of help it, and so it ultimately at the end felt like it'd be better off without me. Because the direction I would have gone with it was a different direction than they wanted to go with it, so it would have been best to just let them do their thing. And so I went off and made House of the Devil.
Hi, I wanted to ask you for the music process. Did you start composing before the shooting with the script or later? And how was working with Tyler Bates and Chelsea Wolfe? I love the voice motifs on X, so extraordinary.
Yes, so Tyler I had worked with before, and so he's great to work with. I love Tyler. I wanted the X score to be female vocal driven, and he had just worked with Chelsea on something, and her music is really awesome, and so she was looking to do a movie, and so it was the perfect timing and the perfect fit. They did do some stuff prior to shooting, and I think just to kind of feel out what it would be like, I think the theme was figured out then, and we kept that. A lot of the other stuff was really cool, but things change once you make the movie. But I think her main theme was one of the first things they sent me, and that was before we even shot, and that stayed all the way through. But Tyler's great. I mean, Tyler is he works nonstop and works so fast and is so collaborative and so creative, and he was a real pleasure. And to work with him and Chelsea on this, and then turn around and do Pearl, which instead of being this stripped down vocal score was this 65-piece orchestra in a very sort of old traditional Hollywood way, is truly a credit to Tyler and his ability to do just about anything.
Sí, X es una película que también habla sobre la vejez y la sexualidad reprimida. Y quería preguntarte, uno, ¿por qué decidiste introducir algo que no se ha visto casi nunca en los slashers? ¿Y cómo lo hiciste para introducirlo y que no... para que no discerniera mucho el tono de la película y te quedara una especie de Frankenstein de película en el que no cabría eso en un slasher?
Okay, so in X, the movie, you also talk about getting old and sexuality that can be consumed. So my first question is, why do you introduce a topic that has never been introduced in a slasher, and how do you do it so it doesn't look like a Frankenstein in the movie, so it makes sense?
I don't know. I mean, when I had the idea for X, I was trying to think of, well, if we're going to make a slasher movie, who are the villains in it? And traditionally in slasher movies, historically, usually people were being punished for doing things that you weren't supposed to do, whether it's sex and drugs and whatever. Sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of stuff is looked down upon, and they were sort of puritanically being punished. And I thought that it would be interesting to have the characters in X, the sort of villains in X, rather than being angry that these people were, sinful, that they were actually just jealous and that they were more resentful of their lack of ability to do it anymore. That seemed to be like something that I had not seen in a horror movie. It seemed to be maybe a little bit more like honest in a way, and it seemed to be something also, you know, this sort of existential threat of getting older is something that like everyone on Earth has to deal with, and so it seemed like a relatable way to create like villains in a slasher movie that were like seemed like real people, and to kind of turn a trope on its head a little bit, and that would make it feel fresh and new, and so it felt like a new perspective of a slasher movie rather than just, you know, line them up, knock them down kind of thing, and so. As far as like how I did it, I don't know. I mean, I just sort of like, that was the idea, and I was like, I'm going to give this a shot, and now here we are, and that's the movie. And so, you know, it's hard for me to analyze what was done about it other than just trying to follow that idea to its, you know, most interesting and hopefully honest places.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about the rhythm, the pace of your movies. There's always this like of contention of the mystery, and it goes like so strong. And I think it's something that changes between your filmography, but it's always there. So I wanted to ask you about the creative process of that. It's like something that it's deliberate, it's just the way you work, you put it on the script. I'm always curious about that. Thank you.
I mean, there's nothing about it in the script other than the fact that, you know, maybe someone doesn't die until later in the pages or something. But, you know, that's something that I think I've gotten a lot of attention or credit or complaints about is the, I guess, pace at which that I make movies. I really don't think about it at all. I mean, I think about it in the sense that I'm trying to attach you to the characters and to the time and place of a movie, and to try to lure you into thinking about one thing so that I can have something else going over. So I'm certainly thinking about it from like a constructing the movie standpoint of just being like, you think it's going to be this, but it's actually this and stuff like that. But as far as like whether that takes 10 minutes or an hour, to me, it's like, it just takes what it takes. Like I don't, and I just feel it out. And so, I mean, if you chopped a big chunk out of, let's say, the first quarter or something of a movie of mine, it would be shorter, but it wouldn't necessarily be better, you know, because the movie is sort of propped up on your expectations of what you think is coming and things like that, because it's dealing with suspense and things like that. Because a lot of times, chances are, if you see a movie of mine, you've at least seen the trailer, so you kind of know where it's. If a movie's called The House of the Devil, it's like when she goes to the house, you're like, okay, it's not going to be good. So then, from my side of things, if she goes to the house and immediately something terrible happens, you're like, of course, that's boring. But if you don't know when it's going to happen, but you're a hip modern audience, I have to keep subverting when you think it's going to happen. Otherwise, you're going to see everything coming, and then it's going to also be boring. So I think that's something just with horror movies, and I think I lean more in a sort of suspense category. I think you just have to sort of be patient, and you have to, in a way, kind of lure the audience in and manipulate them a little bit with the timing and the pacing of the movie in order to deliver for them in the second half. So it's one of those weird things that's, if I made it shorter and it wasn't as good, then it would not be slow burn, but it would be not good. And that seems like a worse choice. But so I don't know. I think to me, I just sort of, it unfolds how it unfolds. Yeah, a big part of it to me also is like endearing you to the characters and to the geography of where it takes place. So that way, when someone runs out of a door later, you're like, I know where they're going because I've seen that earlier. So they're not running it out into a room that you're like, I don't even know where I am. And all that stuff helps orient you to the movie.
¿Más preguntas?
Hola, me gustaría saber un poco más acerca del proceso de montaje, más específicamente de X, porque creo que tiene una parte narrativa bastante importante. Y sé que has hablado un poco del montaje, pero me gustaría que pudieses hablar un poco más sobre X. Gracias.
I'd like to know about the editing process, especially in X, the movie.
X was a very hard movie to edit because of the movie within a movie aspect. There's a lot of it was scripted when it's in the movie and when it's in the movie they're making. So it was a bit, going back to the question before, it was kind of a scripting where it did say like in 16 millimeter this was happening, and then it was like not in that. And so when you put it together, I put it together with that goal, and most of that worked, but some of it didn't. And so because I had the movie they were making and then the movie I was making, you often had opportunities to go, well, should we stay in the movie within the movie or stay within the regular movie? And that can do you in because it's too many options. And so some of the movie was very easy to put together, but there was chunks where they were intercutting things that was just to try to get it just right. There was so many forks in the road that you could choose from that it was kind of tedious and exhausting. You can get a kind of paralysis of analysis type situation. So it was a tedious movie to put together and very challenging, especially the parts of the movie that are intercutting between the two stories. But I think, the challenge that was shows because I do think that those are some of the better scenes in the movie, and I do think those are scenes in the movie where the audience is very aware of the editing of the movie, and audiences are never aware of editing in movies anymore. No one's thinking about it. So the goal was to try to invite the audience into filmmaking and to be thinking about it. And I would say for the majority of my experiences from seeing that movie or talking to people about the movie, it's very rare that people ask, in this case, multiple questions about the editing of a movie, and that's because I think the editing is a thing in the movie, and it makes you think about, oh, look, that's the movie they're making, but it's paralleling the movie that he's making, like, huh, and it's like something, versus just being like an invisible thing that moves the movie along.
One last question.
Well, in most of the horror movies, characters end up dying like too soon in the movie before you can care a lot about them. So it's like, okay, he died. But in X, you took like a long time to develop them. When they die, or even before that, you understand what they are doing. You can feel what they feel. You can see this parallelism between Pearl and them. And well, there's, I think, some kind of cliche in the horror genre nowadays that they replace the character development with just shock impact. Like as long as there is some jump scares or something that can scare the kids, it's enough for a movie. So what I think that makes X a great movie is that you can understand the characters, there's a story behind them. So what do you think about character development in the horror genre? Is like important, or is something you can replace with just scare things and that is. Thank you.
I think it's very important. I think the movie kind of relies on it. Not everybody feels that way. There's plenty of movies that, as you're describing, are relatively empty kind of experiences with the characters, but have, let's say, a series of jump scares or whatnot. People tend to go to those movies, so as long as people go to those movies, there will be more of those movies, but as long as people go to movies like X or whatever, there'll be more of those also. So I think you can just have both, but my taste is certainly in a more developed way than something that's just... A lot of those sort of larger studio movies that are doing what you're describing are... The goal of that movie is just a weekend entertainment thing, and it's meant to be like everyone comes on the weekend, they see the movie, everybody talks about it, everybody goes home, and then that movie kind of disappears into the ether. I think that the movies that I came up on and love and things like that stick around, and you watch them multiple times. I think a lot of the sort of jump scare-driven movies, you don't have a need to go back and watch them. They're kind of a one-time experience. So, but I think there can be both. I think it'd be nice if stuff that wasn't that was a little more popular than it was. But that's always the artist strife of wanting this sort of more esoteric stuff to be bigger than it is. But I think as long as people support it and as long as people enjoy it, it's not just me doing that. Plenty of people will be doing it, and people do it better than I do, I'm sure.
Okay, for closing this encounter, I must say that the people from Sitges Film Festival, the organizers and the people, the audience, we are very happy to have to award with the Time Machine Award a young filmmaker, because this award is not only for nostalgic or for a career from the past, very important people from the past. It's important for us because filmmakers to give the genre something new, something fresh, and new ideas. And Ty West is this kind of filmmaker. And it's a time machine for the future, I think. You are a filmmaker for the future. And thank you for coming, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's such a, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And we had talked about it earlier. I was here with my first film, The Roost, 17 years ago, which seems like it couldn't have possibly been that long, but it was. And it's very surreal to be back here and to be having this conversation and to be presenting the movie tonight. So thank you for showing my first movie, especially, and then just showing my other movies over the years. And I'm happy I could finally, schedule-wise, be back here for this because it's great. Thank you.